This is gonna be a long one. Why, hello everyone, my hair is blue. We have a lot to talk about today and this just simply can't fit into it. So just go with it, roll with it. We're all in this together, okay. Hi, it's Kendall here. If you're new around here, welcome. If you're not new around here, what is up, home skillet biscuit? And happy Saturday. If you don't know what Saturday is, it's generally when I do this thing on my channel called Bad Movies and a Beat, the series on my channel where I talk about bad movies while putting my makeup on. For today's video, gotta say I am putting my non-professional, professional cinema critic, that's the word, hat on. I say that like I literally have any credentials for any of the other videos I've done for this at all, but today particularly, ya bitch was researching. I was reading books. I was watching interviews. I was watching documentaries. I wish it were simply the movie, but there's so much encapsulating today's film that it just wouldn't do justice to just talk about the movie, because the movie is only one tiny minuscule part of the overall drama, tragedy, and to some extent hilarity of the whole day. So that's why I was gone last week, because I went into the wormhole, the rabbit hole. I was just swimming in it, and I'm just gonna peek my head out of it. I'm sure I could have dug even deeper in there, but considering y'all would like a video eventually, here I am. Today we're talking about another camp film. And in my last video, not my last Bad Movies and a Beat, but my last like get ready with me last week, I talked a bit about how I've accepted that I'm a Showgirls fan. I'm not gonna go into it here. It's a whole thing. And today we're talking about a film that many have kind of regarded as, no pun intended, kind of the mother film of that film to some extent. I was a bit hesitant to talk about this film because it is another film that in some way involves MGM, who I have a one-sided vendetta against. So I wouldn't be surprised in swift mentioning of this film, they try to claim this too, but guess what? Bitch, I got a sponsor. Don't fuck with me, fellas! Today's sponsor is House, curators of some of the world's finest aperitifs. If you don't know, aperitifs are an alcohol that's usually served on the rocks and used as an appetizer, i.e. before meals. And House is home to some of the most beautifully curated aperitifs made from real fruit, herbs, botanicals. House creates some of the smoothest and most interesting flavor profiles, including but not limited to lemon lavender, bitter clove, ginger yuzu, which is now resting completely and utterly empty. I quite liked it. It was very nice. It was great with fish. Grapefruit jalapeno, which is, it sounds fascinating. I would like to try that. I think that would be really good with I eat a lot of fish. Like a grilled tilapia, maybe with like some green salsa verde. Or maybe like a marinated pork chop. I'm such a cook these days. But today we're drinking spiced cherry, which is cherry and spiced. Flavored cherry, aniseed, fragrant tilled cherry pepper, and cacao nibs. Wow. Sip it on the rocks or with your favorite brown liqueur. I'm drinking mine on the rocks. Oh, what would that go? Red meat. Sorry, I was contemplating whether or not I have time to cook steak right now. No, I'm filming. Filming, Kendall. Priorities. Feel free to check out the description box for a link to House and get 15% off with your code KennieJD. For subscribers 21 plus and over. I shouldn't have to explain that. Big thanks to House for sponsoring today's video and giving us a little bit of wiggle because today it's a lot. Maybe it's good that I have a drink. Last time I was with you all, we looked at the sci-fi horror debacle called What Lies Below. A story that was already taking us places that we didn't want to go, but then veered off swiftly into What the Fuckland. If you haven't checked out that video, you can check that out up above, or you can check it out in the Bad Movies and a Beat playlist. As I'd mentioned earlier, today we are looking at a camp classic. The 1981 docufilm known as Mommie Dearest, about old Hollywood movie icon Joan Crawford and her abuse towards her adopted daughter, Christina Crawford. Now, I've heard of this film prior to people asking for it for this series. I was always under the impression that Mommie Dearest was somewhat of like a horror movie. I knew that it was supposed to be a film that was about like not very nice mom. What piqued my interest outside of like people requesting it here and there, is I fell down the Showgirls rabbit hole, and I was watching a documentary about Showgirls, which I've brought up here and there throughout other videos, called You Don't Know Me. They were comparing the two films, Showgirls and Mommie Dearest, as if they were both accidental cult classics. And I heard some compare Elizabeth Berkley's performance, this high frequency sort of manic energy that Faye Dunaway gave to that film. But one of the things they also did is refer to Elizabeth Berkley's countenance and demeanor as somewhat as soft as Joan Crawford, as associating that whoever this person Joan Crawford was not very soft or ladylike and delicate, what have you. Which brings me to my own naivete, because I, one, had no idea who Joan Crawford was. Two, had no idea she was a real person. So as far as I knew, Joan Crawford was just this fictional character that they made a movie called Mommie Dearest about, and she was just the bad mom. That's how I understood it, because I didn't really look into it. Keep in mind, in that veil of ignorance, I watched the film. Again, knowing none of the context of the film's making, why it was made. I was deeply disturbed. And outside of that, I was equally confused. I was so confused on how this movie that handles a bunch of like really hard to digest topics turned into a cult comedy. And honestly, I was a little disgusted. I was a little judgy that people found it funny. But instead of just going, everyone who ever found this funny is a monster, I decided to look more deeply into it. I started to sort of peel away what this film really is. The dreams of what it were to be, the aspirations for it, the expectations for it, what it was supposed to mean, what it was supposed to mean to society. You know, much in the same way the Showgirls was supposed to be this like harrowing story of women's sexuality and sexual liberation, and then turned into that. But once I started to peel into that and all of the surrounding machinations around the film, it somehow turned the film into one of the most peculiar and disturbing comedies. So what ultimately happened is my interactions with the film and my thoughts in the film kind of went in these kind of vaguely outlined stages. In some cases, they kind of intertwine, but vaguely so, this is how my reaction to the film went. Stage 1, abject horror. Again, I went into Mommie Dearest completely blind. I had no idea that a real person was being referenced to, let alone real events. I didn't know who Joan Crawford was. All I knew was that I was watching a movie about a crazy mother, and for some reason people thought it was like camp comedy gold. And for some reason drag queens really like it. So when I watched it, admittedly, I was half paying attention, cooking dinner. And while I was cooking dinner, I would just hear these bellowing screams of a child. I was just very disturbed by what I would see as I was like coming back and forth to the film. And so at some point, it's just, again, kind of judging anyone who was like, this is funny. And I'm like, it's funny. Until I sat down and actually watched the movie and see the facial expressions of Faye Dunaway, who plays Joan Crawford. And you really pay attention to lines, and you see the weird, not quite rightness of a lot of things in the film. I found myself in this position where I inexplicably started to laugh. And then after I'd laugh, I'd have this rush of mortification. Like, it was disturbing to find certain things funny, right? Liberated from the paradigm of real and not real. It exists in this suspended place in between, the uncanny valley of film. And that is ultimately what I've discovered is camp. I sound like such a art person right now. But yes, there is this kind of permeating bizarre factor that never completely overshadows the disturbance. That disturbing factor permeates also through the entire film, at least in my opinion. It is a very serious subject after all. But in the process of watching this film, I realized that so much of the film felt so almost caricature-like, clownery, absolves itself from being completely and utterly serious, that it started to pique my curiosity and I just had to know more. Which leads us into stage 2, which I call Contextualized hilarity. And boy, did I learn more. I ended up stumbling upon a channel called Be Kind Rewind, which I highly recommend you watch their channel because I subscribed immediately after. It was incredibly fascinating. But they did a video somewhat serendipitously only like 2 or 3 months ago about Mommie Dearest. It's an amazing documentary, and that's when I really got a lot of the bone work, the contextualization that really got me to understand a bit more why people view Mommie Dearest in the way that they do, despite it being about something as serious as child abuse. Anyway, from watching that video, I learned a bunch of very crucial information. One, of course, that Joan Crawford is a real person, that she was an actress, that the film was actually the adaptation of a 1978 memoir tell-all from her adopted daughter, Christina. The memoir was one of the first tell-alls of Hollywood children, particularly in regards to child abuse from these A-list parents of the silent movie era and the black and white movie era and the 40s, 50s, 60s, what have you. And Christina had published this book a few years after her mother's death, in which she basically took Christina and her brother Christopher completely out of her will and testament. She left them no money for, quote, reasons well known to them. The memoir was, for all intents and purposes, revenge, the airing out of something that was taboo to refer to, child abuse, especially of the time. This is the late 70s. So the book was criticized for perhaps not giving a well-rounded view of Joan and presenting her as kind of this kind of one-sided villain.
This, of course, does not deny or diminish what Christina experienced. To know why the hammer is swung does not remove the pain of its impact. Still, one would think that anyone who could muster whatever it takes to write a book about a given subject could take the next step and arrive at an understanding of that subject.
I don't think the victim has the obligation to sit there and do this whole empathic thing in their own memoir about their abuse, about what it was like for their parent, the abuser. Like, I don't think that's a fair what. Despite the criticism, the book did incredibly well. It was perversely entertaining. It was intriguing to the public. So it ended up being on the New York Times bestseller list for about, if I'm not mistaken, about 42 weeks, so nearly a year. You know, finding out that this story was made by an actual woman who was abused by her actual mother, to some degree, I thought that that would dampen the humor that I was starting to find in parts of the film. Again, it's still largely disturbing, but there are some undeniably funny parts of the film. It really didn't. It actually made it that much funnier, because I don't think that anyone, including myself, because I do find this movie in some parts to be just ravenously funny, but I don't think that anyone that finds this movie funny thinks of it as funny because of abuse. I don't think. I genuinely, I mean, there are some people out there who hate kids and y'all need to go to therapy. I don't think the majority of people that find humor in this film think it is so because of the abuse. For me, the comedy comes in from, again, this idea, these bellowing, grandiose ideas of what this film was going to mean to society. The makers, all too many of them, because they had like 8 billion writers on the film as well. What is it? Too many cooks in the kitchen ruin the soup or ruin the sauce or whatever. This is an Oscar winner, baby. Like, this is gonna change. This is gonna be an incredible film, a critically acclaimed film. We're gonna get all the Oscars. More importantly, we're gonna make a very serious movie about a very serious topic instead of making this incredibly serious film. They came out with this. And I'd be lying if I didn't say in some like dubious fashion, that is darkly funny. And then I delved even deeper. I ended up listening a bit more to the audiobook. Oh my God, even more so left me just confused because like I didn't finish the book. I got like halfway through and I figured y'all wanted a video this week, so I'd have to start filming if you wanted to see it. But when I got about halfway through, maybe to chapter 13-ish, and around that time I was just sitting there like, literally, how did you make that film from this source material? The way that it missed the mark almost impressively. Like the mark's here and they just threw it all over there. There is an element of humor to that. And that's how I ended up in the third stage, which I call acquiescence. The disturbingly hilarious. Imagine you were a reader of this book in 1981 or whenever it came out, and you enjoyed the book, you read the book, and you hear that there's a film coming out about the book. But you hear this film is coming out, again, about this very serious topic, a very serious conversation to be had. Also, perhaps are a fan of Joan Crawford. You knew her as this kind of princess of Hollywood, of the silent movie era that transcended into winning an Oscar for a film in the 1940s when she was older. And to find out that that perfect veil that she had over herself was immaterial, there was nothing there, and that she was instead this vicious monster behind the scenes, you're expecting to see a movie that encapsulates that. But you go into the theater and you see this. To me, that's the most comedic part of the film. But this film is a bit different than other camp films I've watched in the sense that it doesn't quite exist in this surreal bubble that other films can kind of exist in, because it is about real people, right? That makes it sort of like a wavelength, weave in and out of being deeply disturbing, hyper stylized comedy, this extremity that is so funny, and then again with a serious topic like abuse digs even deeper into that disturbing element and somehow rises above that, sometimes in the same scene. And so despite these again being real events, they're pushed into this world where those events aren't quite real. They're fantasy, they're clownery, they're too much, making the person that was real, Joan and Christina, but Joan particularly, into like a theoretical Joan, a hypothetical Joan, and by proxy, a theoretical, hypothetical, in quotations, Christina as well, the daughter, as well as her experiences. Now, I'll get into that towards the end of the video, why that's particularly up. There's a dark, looming, hysterical comedy woven within this film of tragedy. Both of those qualities, the disturbing factor and the hilarity, can exist simultaneously and in ways that don't cancel each other out or don't negate those things. It's the excessiveness, the hyperbole, this maintenance, which is quite impressive to some degree, of this like hysterical energy that Faye Dunaway has throughout the entire film that just makes it the most outlandish comedy. And now that I've prefaced the hell of this movie, here we have it, 1981, Mommie Dearest. Now, in one way that is similar to the memoir, the film itself is sort of like an anthology of events, so to speak, involving the oldest adopted daughter of Joan Crawford, Christina Crawford, sort of list of interactions and offenses that Joan had perpetrated throughout her childhood and her young adult life. This happened, and this happened, and this happened, and they don't necessarily have to do with each other. And at some point, they kind of sloppily try to tie things together, and it's arguable if they were effective in doing that, but for the most part the film is just events. But the film begins with Joan's meticulous facial cleansing morning routine. Joan is sort of feverishly cleansing her face almost aggressively with cleanser and brushes, and cleansing her nails and washing her entire forearms, and there's something in this first scene that in my mind kind of prepares you for our character of Joan. Not referring to actual Joan, because from all accounts from the actual Christina, Joan Crawford was not at all like the movie portrayal of her. I don't know to some extent if I'm gonna art people this scene, if this is supposed to be at all like foreshadowing of the type of personality of Joan, the character, in the sense that she would be this very hot and cold personality. I might be giving them more credit than they actually deserve. But even this scene is where we first see that quality I was referring to, that like there's something just a little too unreal about it. Something I'm witnessing right now isn't entirely reality outside of it being a film, but do you know what I mean? Like some films you forget that you're watching a movie. There's something very I'm watching a movie, even though this is supposed to be about real people that I'm watching right now. But Joan is getting her makeup done and we see her swivel around as Joan, and there's something uncanny about the makeup job they did. But even in their closeness that they were able to achieve, there is something almost uncanny valley about it. And I noticed it particularly in the eyebrows, because I look at eyebrows. Joan Crawford had very, very angular eyebrows. And again, in my research, I was like, man, she has some fucking eyebrows. Those are good eyebrows. And so when I looked at the makeup on Faye Dunaway, I realized they got the angle wrong. And just that little bit was enough to propel her into this like surrealism in my eyes, at least. There's something just a little bit off about her face, about her expressions, especially when she's like overacting throughout the entire movie. But in some way, accidentally, I'm sure, that there's gonna be a offness about this entire movie. But Joan is a neat freak, to say the least. And this is displayed in one of the first scenes where she's cleaning her own mansion and she chastises one of her maids because they didn't move the tree while polishing the floor. And this is where we hear some of the first like vocal lines.
When you polish the floor, you have to move the tree. If you can't do something right, don't do it at all. Helga, I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at the dirt. Yes, ma'am.
Keep in mind, I'm talking about the first like official viewing, I like to call it, where I actually sat there and watched the whole movie. But I felt like, oh my God, if I'd have seen this and paid attention to this, I would have known I was in for something spectacular. And because also right after that, we get another just choice and weird interaction. We meet Greg, Joan's attorney. And of course, off and on lover throughout the years. But he comes in and she tells him to take his shoes off. You know, she just cleaned the floor. And he says, what about the socks? One of the biggest components of the hilarity of this movie is that they take a little too long doing certain scenes. And that's what pushes it over the edge into comedy. The pause, as I like to refer to it as.
I can handle the socks.
And I'm sitting there like, am I supposed to know what that means? Like 1930s innuendo that I'm not quite aware of. But they smash in the shower. It's fine. And soon after that, Joan is walking with Greg on the beach and she's like, I want a baby. I'm going to adopt one. Apparently she had tried to get pregnant and she had had, at that point, 7 miscarriages with her ex-husbands at this point. And Greg is like, well, they're going to turn you down. You're a single mother. This is the 40s after all, or 30s after all. You've had 2 divorces, which does not look good. You're also a working woman. You're always out of the house. You know, that's not a fit environment for a child. They're not going to accept you. But he admits that if they're able to do it, it would be very good publicity for her failing acting career.
Bastard. Why don't you try to understand a woman?
So she goes to the orphanage and they turn her down, as was suspected, for all the aforementioned reasons.
Denying one of your children the opportunity to live a wonderful and advantaged life. How sad that is.
See, it's scenes like this that set the tone, honestly. You're not here to watch a serious movie. Or not completely serious, at least. You're here to watch a fantasy experience. The drama. The Hollywood starlets is actually a two-faced mommy villain. I can understand why drag audiences like it, because there is this element of like one-liners, extraness. Now, according to the book, which I'm so happy I listened to, again, about half of it, because there's a lot of contextual things that just kind of happen in this film and we don't know how we got here. In real life, Joan, again, was turned down by the agency. She ended up getting her children illegally through some like you know, people that she knew in the industry. There's mention of like the Jewish mafia. It goes real deep. I didn't even know there was a Jewish mafia. I'm learning so much. And somehow she got a kid, and she was able to get it registered in Nevada, where they had some like looser adoption laws. And because of that, she was able to get her first adopted daughter, who was Christina Crawford. So Christina had quite the privileged life right after she was adopted. You know, and for several years too, she had these big, extravagant birthday parties. She'd get riddled with presents, and she'd take all these pictures, and there'd be photographers and reporters about how extravagant these parties were for her as a small child. Joan seemed to use these as publicity stunts to show how great of a mother she was and to get her name into the papers. The papers! I did watch a lot of stuff about this, and now I slightly think I've taken on the Mid-Atlantic accent on accident. My bad. In the movie, it shows that she also has a little brother now named Christopher, who's also been adopted. Yes, she's here, she's got all these gifts, but apparently Joan makes it so that she's not allowed to keep all of these gifts. She's able to keep one that she really, really likes, and the rest go to orphans who don't have anything. Now, according to Joan, this is to teach her the act of sacrifice and giving to those less fortunate, which I'm not opposed to generally, but it's like, it's her birthday. I do think it's important to teach like kids the act of giving, and that sometimes to give you have to take from your own reserves. I understand that lesson is very important to teach kids, and encouraging them to make that choice more often than not, but don't do it on her birthday. But as Christina grows, she becomes more and more outspoken against her mother, and this is presumably where the abuse begins. It starts small. It starts with her chastising her to dive better. She gives this whole speech about how she didn't have a chance to just grow up and be a kid. She had to learn early that the world isn't easy, baby, or something like that.
Life goes by too damned fast. You've got to know how to compete and win.
This fight to win whole line goes into her telling Greg that basically she hasn't gotten anything that was really good for her career recently. She needs something to revitalize her career. She needs an Oscar winner. When Greg leaves, Joan decides to race Christina in the pool.
Who wants to go swimming?
I do.
She was already in the pool. She was already in the pool, actively swimming. They race, and being that Joan is like 2 feet taller than her, she wins, as you'd imagine. And this starts to upset Christina because she thinks it isn't fair. Joan then gives her this whole breakdown about how life isn't fair, and you shouldn't expect it to be fair, and how she will always beat her. I mean, it's a story about bad parenting, but that's great way to build your kids' confidence. But yeah, this upsets Christina, and this is her first time kind of in the movie, at least, explicitly vocalizing that. She's like, well, if that's how it is, I'm not gonna go against you ever. Joan yells at her for raising her voice at her mother. She gives her a little bit of a spanking and then throws her in the closet. And then we just go to the next scene. I don't know how long she was in there. At some point she got out, but we have no idea how long she was in there. I hate to say who cares, because one of my favorite scenes is coming up. It's not funny, but one of my favorite scenes is coming up. And that is Joan's jog. And basically during this jog, she's kind of talking about how her career is going down, but how she will survive. She's like, they're trying to end my career. I will survive. After returning, Greg calls. Again, he's the lawyer. I don't know why he would be doing this, but he calls to tell her that Mayor at her production house thinks she would be great for that part that she wanted. This greatly excites her. She's like bouncing off the wall. She's like, oh my God, I got it. And she runs to tell Christina, who's not in her room. She's in her mom's room playing with her like setting lotion and her brushes, and she's in front of the mirrors giving like a speech as if she's just won an award. And this innocent situation sends Joan into a tirade. Now, if I recall correctly, I could be wrong, but I don't think this event was even in the book. I think they completely added this scene to it. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure I don't recall this ever happening. This sends Joan into a tirade, an overacted tirade. But this is one of the first scenes that I noticed that wavelength I was talking about before, the in and out. This singular scene has moments, if you look too long, it gets disturbing. But if you look even longer, it becomes hilarious. And if you look even longer than that, it becomes even more disturbing. She has her hair kind of matted up with all this hair lotion, this setting lotion that she's put in her hair, and so she just goes hacking at her hair with scissors. And Christina's like crying, and again, it's very disturbing, and you could tell that they wanted it to be that. But then the scene keeps going, and you look at Joan, and she switches from this real person into the cartoon villain, and that's at that moment, once that little bit of realism breaks, it transcends into something entirely different. And I can't explain the phenomenon outside of that. You be quiet now! Why are you looking at yourself in the mirror? I'd rather you go bald to school than looking like a tramp! You spoiled it! Like I spoiled you!
You spoiled it just like I spoiled you!
Again, I still can't quite explain the phenomenon, and you can think of me as a monster or whatever. I've tried to do all my disclaimers as much as possible, but the delivery and line choices just just sent it into the stratosphere. There's something about the ill-timed delivery of certain parts that makes it kind of break the line of continuity in a way that's deliciously hilarious. Joan and Greg go to a swanky restaurant at which she's kind of bombarded by all of her adoring fans. And in the midst of her signing autographs and talking with them, Greg decides to go into the restaurant by himself and ends up talking with one of the men at her production house, Mr. Mayor, as in Metro Goldwyn Mayer, aka MGM. And basically she's gonna do the whole hellos or whatnot with him, even though she kind of blames him for ruining her career right now because she doesn't have much work. She hasn't had like a good picture, partially because of him, because he's not, putting her out there to be in good film. And so though she didn't want to stay at their table, she ends up doing it because they'd already kind of got suckered in by Greg while she wasn't there. And everything bothers Joan. But this bothers Joan, and she gets drunk and starts arguing with Greg about how he was treating her like a floozy, going over to talk to the men like that. He basically says, well, he walked in alone because she was busy with her fans. And again, we get another one of those, you expect me to ignore my fans? They are life and death to me, baby.
You expect me to ignore my fans? They're life and death to me, baby.
And around this time, I start to notice this movie is literally just yelling. The whole movie is just yelling. The whole damn movie. God. She chastises him for fraternizing with a man that is, for all intents and purposes, a threat to her career. And in a fit of rage, she says that she knows that there's so much dirt in this industry, most of which is tied to Greg the lawyer, and that she's willing to tell it all to expose him and drag him down because of it. He gets mad and he overacts. Boy, does he.
Damn you! Are you crazy? Help me! Help me!
I'm crazy.
Not enough people talk about that scene as an overact. And they break up in quite the uber soap opera-esque way possible. Joan, distraught after her breakup, cuts his face out of all of her pictures. Christina finds one of these. For some reason, it's still in a frame, despite the glass being broken and the face being cut out and then placed neatly in front of the picture. She finds it and she remarks to her little brother basically that this means if mommy wants to get rid of you, she can. Next scene, and Christina and Christopher are playing loudly in the garden, and it ends up waking Mommy Dearest. She goes out to the balcony, yells at the kids to quiet down, and chastises them for making noise when they promised they wouldn't, because she has a big day today. She's going to see Mayor at the production office. Oh, I went all matte and I look so dry. Just a little spray. sprays half the bottle. Christina goes into her room and chastises her dolls, much like her mother chastised her. I can't tell what they were going for originally with this scene, because you see in the background Joan looking at her daughter doing this. At that point, she seems touched by it at first, but then they zoom into her face and she goes into a rage. And I don't know if that was meant to show like how she can fly off the handle suddenly, or that was just bad. That was just bad direction, but okay. So what does the evil mommy do? She like gives the dolls away. She sends them away, throws them away. They're gone. Christina's like, where are my dolls? And she goes into her mom's like beauty room in a movie that's supposed to be taken seriously, instead of like just as she's like maniacally lotioning her elbows. They were bad children, so perhaps they won't interrupt your sleep again like you interrupted mine, essentially. And again, it's another one of those scenes that shows like, oh, you weren't going for an actual human being when you created this character. You were going for something that would be known as Mommy Dearest, or at least that's how it feels. Not someone, something, maleficent villain type thing. It was weird. It's weird. It's a memoir. If you were making this movie out of nothingness and then made this movie, then that's another thing, but it's a memoir. You don't have to turn a real person into a character. It really is the most cynical thing, isn't it? It's like, we have a story about child abuse. That's not enough drama. Let's give it fashion. Let's make it flashy. We need it soap opera-esque. And it's like, child abuse ain't enough drama. That's not enough of like a harrowing okay. But Joan goes to meet Mayor at that aforementioned meeting, at which she's under the impression that she's about to get like some part, you know, that's gonna change her career for the better. But instead, he's firing her. He's telling her, you've been great, doll, but you need to go. Which, from what I understand, is also not true. The accounts that I found in research, she actually left on her own accord. But I guess that didn't work for the story. He's basically like, oh, let's end amicably. We had differences, and, you know, the very like bullshit things that people say to make it sound less bad than like you're fired. And she takes it. Again, not the best. She gets in a ball gown and just starts hacking at roses in her rose bush. And the disturbing hilarity continues, because bring the children! Clear out the roses! Clear out the roses! And then ultimately she sees this tree, and that has to go. Tina! Bring me the axe!
Tina! Bring me the axe!
And then for the next 15 to 20 seconds, we can sit there and watch her hack until it goes down. Even the way she swung the axe had this kind of lip sync for your life type quality. And it's just, child, I'm flabbergasted. Abandoned by MGM, she ends up joining a different film production company, with which she was given the role for Mildred Pierce. And this is the first major role she's done in years, and she's super nervous about it, and she's practicing and slapping people, and she's preparing for this role. Next scene is them at lunch, apparently, not dinner. Who the fuck eats a steak at lunch? And they're eating a steak that is still mooing. That's fucking disgusting. But apparently, according to the doctors that Joan is talking to, you need your cow to still be mobile for it to have any vitamins and minerals in it. Christina, reasonable child as she is, thinks it's disgusting and does not want to eat it. This naturally does not go well with Joan, who's not big on not being obeyed. And she tells Christina that she can't get up from her spot until she eats every bit on that plate. And so Christina sits there for an undescribed amount of time, but like the sun is rising or setting or something. Joan gives in and allows Christina to go, but she tells her to take that plate and she's gonna go upstairs and eat every bit of that cow that still has breath in it. They go back and forth over the significance of this cow. I'm just gonna call it cow. That's not beef. It's not finished. Joan basically says,
Why must everything be a contest?
That's their first meaningful attempt at humor. It's like the irony. Joan. Fast forward, and the film Mildred Pierce is up for an Oscar. Joan is up for Best Female Lead, and she elects to not go and instead feigns the flu to stay home and watch it, presumably because she couldn't take the embarrassment if she lost. But she wins, and suddenly she no longer has the flu. She goes outside of her house, and the reporters and the photographers are just bellowing her with praise and adoration and congratulations. And she speaks to her people. This is for all of you, each and every one of you. Good night.
I love all of you.
Next, we have what I like to refer to as the scene, which is probably the scene that most people know this film for. On one particular night, Joan is cleansing her face and walking through her children's room, and she goes into Christina's closet and notices a single solitary wire hanger. For a reason unbeknownst to us, and perhaps to Christina, this sends Joan into rampage. Bellowing, guttural scream yells out, "No wire hangers! No wire hangers ever!" I have to admit, I had heard the line "no wire hangers" prior to this, and I did recognize that in the sort of the zeitgeist of the Mommy Dearest universe, if you will, that this scene was supposed to be peak camp overacting, just what the hell is happening, just so funny, quote unquote. I understand that component, again, the disturbing hilariousness throughout other parts of this film, but I gotta say, I did not find this scene funny outside of the no wire hangers. That was pretty funny. But everything that kind of happens subsequently during this sort of crown jewel of camp comedy scene that people kind of talk about, I found it just disturbing. I actually didn't find it funny at any point. There was too much about it that felt accurate for once. That's the thing that makes other components of this film funny, right? The like a little off target. And people kind of say this is like the pinnacle of Faye Dunaway's overacting in this film, and I would have to disagree. I feel like this scene is probably the most accurate to someone having a mental breakdown, and it being erratic, and it being over something so tiny, perhaps associated with a mental health issue, or perhaps alcohol abuse or drug abuse or something. The kind of sporadic boiling to the surface, just everything of it. I don't think of this scene as overacting at all. I think this was a very poignantly disturbing scene. I think also the thing that kind of pinpointed this scene is that, though not the best like trick of the eye, you know, movie magic, but these are the first time outside of that spanking outside of the pool that actively beats her kids. Like, she beats her with wire hangers. And again, not the best like movie cutaway to make that look super real, but I don't know, there's something about like actually laying your hands on the kid that is hard for me to reach up the peak, if you know what I mean. But basically she's just having this big giant like horrifying tantrum about nothing being clean, and she beats her with like powder cleaner. I just didn't find anything funny about this scene. I found it deeply disturbing. I think if you've ever seen someone have an episode, this isn't that far away from what it looks like. I'm just gonna say that. Now, granted, there is another scene that is probably supposed to be the same level of disturbing, and it also entails violence, but this is with when Christina is older and she's an adult, or is played by an adult. I don't quite know how old she's supposed to be in the scene, but she's played by an adult and she looks like an adult. So at the point, it's two adults fighting, and that scene is hilarious. That's personally my favorite scene. But yeah, this scene just, I didn't feel it the way that people were saying as far as it being funny. I didn't think it was funny. Anyway, but outside of the abuse that's going on in the home, they're playing to be the perfect family, going on radio interviews about how happy their Christmases are and whatnot. And also during this time, Joan is going and talking to different suitors. One man that comes over and visits, Christina makes a drink for him, as she does all of her uncles, as Joan would have her refer to her men in her life. Christina goes to give them a drink while they're like hot and heavy, about to get down. And when she walks away, for some reason, Joan took this as like making a pass at the guy that came over, even though she's like 7. And that was enough. She was like, take this floozy away from me. She's going to boarding school. I'm like, what? But off to boarding school she goes. While she's away, as children often do, she grows up and she begins to have her own aspirations as an actress. And the woman who plays adult Christina, I would like to applaud her. I really liked her performance. Granted, she's been kind of criticized to be like the foil to Faye Dunaway in the way that Faye Dunaway overacted. She kind of underacted, but I disagree. I liked her performance. She was a little quiet. I could see how in the 80s that wouldn't be the best. The audio wasn't great. I mean, I feel like they couldn't all be crazy like Joan. Like, damn. On one of her weekends home, Joan basically suggests at dinner that she's not doing the best financially, and then later she just outright tells Christina that that's the case, and that Christina would have to work a work scholarship at her boarding school for her tuition. But Joan starts to break down because she had also lost her contract with Warner Brothers. Now, this scene, I think... Again, people don't give this movie its props. There are parts that I feel like Faye Dunaway did it right. Right-ish. Right adjacent. This scene is really like powerful, and as she's kind of like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And you see this like villain again throughout the rest of the movie be vulnerable and saying like, oh my God, I don't know what's gonna happen to me. And Christina being a daughter. And it kind of shows the complicated nature of a mother who's an abuser and how that's a very complicated relationship. It's not just hate. It's not just vitriol. It's also this complicated like love for your mother as well. And also being like an emotional support for her in times like this too. So I thought this was really well done. It's not a lot that this movie did well. For that, I'll give it. Back at school, Christina was caught fraternizing with one of the boys in the stables, and it became quite the ruckus. And Joan decides to take her out of the school due to their negligence, which is quite different from the book, because this whole scenario was actually a lot more messed up in the book. By the way, there's a lot by the way that this movie cut out to make Joan feel like a cartoon villain as opposed to like the actual horrible things that she did. Hey, not the first time that this movie let the book down. So, but on the ride back, we have another line that's amazing because Joan runs out of liquor on the drive. Don't drive drunk. And Christina recommends her go to a place nearby. Well, of course, you know where to find the boys and the booze.
You know where to find the boys and the booze.
I'm your daughter. Of course I do. And now we come to my favorite scene. Joan is having an interview with a woman named Mrs. Bennett, who's a reporter. You don't need to know her name. What a reporter. Joan kind of chastises her in front of this reporter and says that she was expelled from school, which is not true. Her mother took her out. And so that's what Christina says. In front of a reporter. Her image is everything, and you did it in front of a reporter. This starts an argument in which Joan slaps her twice. Now, there is something so maniacally funny about how her elbow, you could almost hear like the rusting sound, just and then we get another iconic line, Barbara, please!
Barbara, please! Please, Barbara!
Please, Barbara, leave us alone. Joan, again, being big on her image and everything, is just aghast that Christina would embarrass her in front of the reporter. And eventually Christina asks a very reasonable question, which is, why did you adopt me? Because, like, bitch, your crazy ass don't like me. You don't really want to take care of your kids. Like, why did you do this? She turns around. That got me too. That got me too. I was almost out. I had to pause. I was like, oh my God. And basically she goes back and forth about whether or not she did it for publicity or wanted to be a mother. Then we have my favorite sequence of events, and I don't know how much comedy I can even add to this scene.
Why can't you give me the respect that I'm entitled to?
Why can't you treat me like any stranger on the street? Because I am not one of your fans! It's almost musical. It's so bad. The hands, the look up and down as she contemplates choking her out. And then they just go at it. And then at the end, there's a raw. Again, this is a serious story. This is a serious movie. But damn, do they make it hard. For her transgressions, Christina is sent to a Catholic school, during which time Joan marries Alfred Steele, the CEO of Pepsi Cola. And now, at least superficially, Joan has money again. Christina graduates from the Catholic school and returns back home to meet her new stepfather. Apparently, this time away has done some magic for Christina and her mother's relationship. They've reconciled a bit. I guess the time away was good for them. I don't know. They all moved to New York now. And Christina, again, is an aspiring actress. She's doing her auditions, and she's also being a waitress at night, despite her mother having all this money apparently. And so she asks her mother, could she perhaps borrow some money because things are a little tight and she's working really hard. She says no. This is Joan Crawford we're talking about. But behind her back, Alfred does give Christina some money to hold her over. Speaking of Alfred and money, he's in some debt. He's going into some debt partially because of Joan's excessive spending. And we have some more like choice lines. You are the genius of the soft drink world. We are going to look good for Pepsi Cola. At the end of this tiff, they basically reached the conclusion that they will figure something out. But in the next scene, he did. According to Christina, in a 2001 interview I saw that she did with Larry King at what would that have been, the 20th anniversary of the movie Mommie Dearest, she basically said that she always found it somewhat suspicious that he died so quickly after they got married, about 3 years.
Mr. Steele treated you well.
Yes, but he died so quickly after they were married. It was only 3 years, and I always thought it was very suspicious.
You
Yeah.
suspected foul play?
I always did, yes.
What was the cause of death?
Somehow he fell down the stairs.
Which there's some contradictory information about that. Some people say that he died of a heart attack. Like the New York Times said that he died of a heart attack. Who knows what the truth is there, but Christina, at least in that interview, was suggesting that Joan may have had something to do with his death. But apparently, Al owed a lot of money to the other board of directors of Pepsi Cola, for which now the widow, Joan Crawford, would owe the rest of the board of directors. And basically, they want to push her off the board and force her to pay all this money that he borrowed while CEO. But then she gives us another choice line of,
Don't fuck with me, fellas! This ain't my first time at the rodeo.
and they're like, all right, never mind, I guess, all right, well, okay. Joan comes to visit Christina and gives her jewelry as a good luck charm as she auditions to play in a soap opera, which she does get the role for. But soon after her first few episodes, she gets a pain in her ovaries and comes to find out she had a benign ovarian tumor that required surgery, so she had to be off of set while she healed. During which time, they hired Joan Crawford, now in her 60s, would be playing her daughter's character, who was supposed to be 28. And this actually happened, by the way. I looked into that one because there's so much they just added to this movie for no reason. That actually happened. Apparently, the character was completely written off in 4 episodes because I guess they couldn't keep pushing Joan Crawford as a 28-year-old. Say I made peace with a lot of other stuff in my childhood, but that would be a whole new shit show that I'd have to bring up. I would have to beat your ass. I'm a grown woman now. I'm gonna beat your ass. And then the next thing you know, Joan is old and presumably sickly, and she is receiving a award on television that Christina gets on her behalf. And she does a speech basically about how she loves her mother and how she must congratulate her for everything that she's accomplished in life. Joan dies. Christina tells her that she loves her in the casket. Christina and Christopher hear the last will and testament, at which Joan Crawford leaves her 2 kids nothing. 0 goose egg. Big fat nada. According to actual Christina, this was quite a shock because as far as she knew, she had made amends with her mother. Christopher remarks darkly how their mother always got the last word, and Christina turns to her brother and solemnly says,
Does she?
And that is the end of the movie. My God, this movie is everything people said and more. I had so much, I didn't know what the fuck I was walking into. Some of the most remarkably terrible line delivery, overacting, unnecessary camp aesthetics and fantasy that's completely displaced in the creation of a memoir film. It's a docu-film. Before I end out this film, I would like to take a moment and talk a bit more about a component that I'm gonna refer to as the true tragedy. As awful as this film is, and even the cheap laughs that we can get from certain parts of it, I would like to at least acknowledge how messed up this whole thing is. I think I'd be remiss if I don't mention that whether you are horrified and or tickled by this film, it'd be irresponsible of me to completely ignore how this whole scenario is quite like the distillation of one woman's tragedy, and that is Christina Crawford. True, Faye Dunaway took some hits to her career, and the movie by no means reached all of these aspirations that it planned for, so it says. I don't know. I think no other person has been more fucked over by any of this than Christina Crawford, the actual Christina Crawford. Christina, from what I understand, is still alive and kicking today. I think she's 80. The real person, Christina Crawford, lived through a childhood full of abuse, neglect, and had to live through the resurgence of her trauma via way of people criticizing her book about her trauma. And then to have her memoir about her trauma turn into a Razzie Award winner and result in grand Hollywood spectacle and ridicule. That's horrible. That is the biggest tragedy of all of this. Granted, from what I understand, or at least from interviews that I've seen, she has largely just disavowed the movie. It's just some other thing that exists out there and she doesn't particularly claim it, which I applaud her for that if that's the case, because you shouldn't. It's really a shame that it's a memoir that broke so many barriers in its depiction and its expression of abuse and trauma, and that somehow in making it in a film, it was no longer about the child being abused. Like somehow Christina had become the supporting character to her own abuse, which I find deeply disgusting. And that's, I think, if we're gonna talk about anything that's really disturbing about this film, I think that probably is the most. Again, from what I understand, Christina in many ways has made peace with it, or at least, I mean, she'd have to, wouldn't she, to continue your life at some point. As a respect for the context of this film and how it was made and the context from which it was made, I have been listening again to the audiobook. Again, I'm about halfway through, and I recommend everybody listen to it if you are a fan of the film Mommie Dearest and would like to get perhaps a more respectable connotation for some of the events in the film. I would highly recommend you read it. Or I'm listening to the audiobook. Because without that memoir, we wouldn't be here. And depending on how you look at it, that could be a good or a bad thing. And that, my friends, is finally all for today, folks. I've been talking for almost 4 hours. Easily gonna be the longest Bad Movies in a Beat that I've ever made. Big thanks again to House for getting me through this video. Feel free to check them out in the description box. If you like this video, feel free to like this video. Follow me on all my social media, Instagram, Twitter, both of which are KennieJD, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.